Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, elves and dwarves, and most importantly, fellow readers, welcome to the Reading Rambles Show. I'm your host, Dirty Mike. All right, today we are doing the quintessential book talk video. Booktube video. Top 10 books of all time. Not just fantasy, not just sci-fi, all time. Before I get into this video, I should probably preface that most of these will be fantasy. When it comes to books I thoroughly enjoy, it is fantasy, sci-fi, lit RPG, romance/smut, and then everything else is tied for 5th place. I have a hard time getting into thrillers and nonfiction and horrors. Second thing I should mention is that I wanted to pick books I loved. Not just comfort books, books I kind of enjoyed, books I enjoyed a lot, books I love. Books that fundamentally changed me, struck a chord in my gut like, ugh! Or just books that teared me up and made me just stare at the wall after I put it down. That's what this list is supposed to comprise of. I know my preferences have changed over time, and I expect them to continue to change, so this will be my top 10 list for 2024. And I will continue to remake this list every year while I have this channel. My final caveat is that I read a lot of book series, and most of my favorite books were wedged in the middle of a series that was fantastic from start to finish. So whenever I mention a book that's in a series, I'm only going to pick one book from that series. Otherwise, this entire list would probably just be Brandon Sanderson books. It was brutally hard for me to narrow down this list. And with that being said, it's time to dig into our honorable mentions. And there's a lot of them. Our first honorable mention is Book 5 of the Defiance of the Fall series by J.F. Brink. This book is just fantastic. I've enjoyed the whole book series, but this book is my favorite one in the series. So far, the series is still ongoing because there's so many layered threats that the protagonist has to deal with. During this book, Earth is currently under a long-distance threat from a powerful C-grade cultivator who could just wipe out everyone on the planet and probably everyone in the sector too. Meanwhile, Earth is currently under invasion by the Undead Empire, who are in the process of terraforming Earth. And if they succeed in their terraforming, Earth will be uninhabitable by all the living. Meanwhile, our dashing protagonist Zack is currently balls deep in the Tower of Eternity, trying to set a new high score. The higher he gets in the tower, the better his rewards will be, and those rewards will probably save his life later on in the series. Also, he needs to enter the tower now because he has to go to the next tier in order to be strong enough to repel the undead invasion, but he can't go through the Tower of Eternity if he reaches the next tier. At the same time that he's going through the Tower of Eternity, there's a ridiculously high bounty on his head that he'll have to confront as soon as he exits the towers. And lastly, while he's in the tower, he has some crazy interactions with some NPCs in the tower that make him question whether or not they're NPCs at all. And it's fantastic writing, the way all these threats are blended together. If I absolutely had to recommend a romance/smut book, I would recommend Virgil Knightley's Monstrous Love series. The whole series from start to finish is just absolutely hilarious and just it's goofy stuff, guys. Goofy. Next on our list is the sad book I have already mentioned on this channel, Joe Abercrombie's Best Served Cold. Joe wrote the phenomenal First Law trilogy. I love that whole trilogy from start to finish. And Best Served Cold has all of the character development, fantastic pacing, ridiculous plot developments, and action that the First Law trilogy had, just crammed into one book. And it is crazy. I don't know a single author who writes like Abercrombie. Like, his writing is phenomenal. The prose is crazy. He makes you care about these morally gray characters. And the only reason this book isn't higher on the list or on the top 10 is because it's just so sad. And I feel so sad after reading one of his books. Believe it or not, there was a time when I exclusively read nonfiction books. And I would be remiss if I didn't include at least one on this honorable mentions. Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand is my favorite biography of all time. And you've probably seen a commercial for the movie directed by Angelina Jolie that is based on this book. Read the book is better. I absolutely love satire, and I still believe it is the best way to interact with politics, period. There was a time when A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court was my favorite book, and I still think it's a fantastic book. It's surprising how well this book holds up today. And then, of course, Terry Pratchett and all of his Discworld series are fantastic. I think Night Watch was my favorite book, but there's so many that I haven't even read yet, and I really need to at some point. Next, we have our first of many Brandon Sanderson books, Tress of the Emerald Sea. What if Brandon Sanderson had written The Princess's Bride, but with a more active female protagonist? That's basically the book. It's fantastic. I would literally recommend this book to anyone. It's a classic. Our next honorable mention is another Brandon Sanderson classic, Warbreaker. This book follows two sisters who are princesses who go on diverging journeys that challenge them in ways that neither of them are prepared for in order to save their kingdom. And it is just fantastic. Seeing their character arc and their growth throughout the book is just really exciting to see. I loved it. My last honorable mention is Book 5 of the Primal Hunter lit RPG series by Zogarth. This book has the craziest fight scene at the end that just renewed my whole interest in the series. Like, this fight is something straight out of Dragon Ball Z. It is that good. Coming in number 10, we have Skyward, the first book of the Skyward book series by Brandon Sanderson. In this book, our female protagonist Spensa attempts to become a pilot, and she has to overcome the stigma that comes from her father abandoning his crew back when he was a pilot. And there's a lot of baggage there and a lot of mystery and intrigue, and it's really good. I know this book is like a chick kind of YA space opera, but I just loved it. And the narration by Susie Jackson is phenomenal. Coming in number 9, we have another standalone Brandon Sanderson book, Elantris. This book follows a cursed city, the people locked in that city researching the curse, the people outside the city who are keeping the cursed people inside the city, and the looming threat of a hostile foreign invasion that will kill everyone, inside and outside of the cursed city, and just the interactions all these characters have with each other. You wouldn't know it based on that description, but this book has my favorite romance arc of any book I have read to this day. Mwah! Chef's kiss. In number 8, we have A Wise Man's Fear, book 2 of the Kingkiller Chronicles. We don't know if we're ever going to see the rest of this series by Patrick Rothfuss. Well, we don't know if it's going to happen, but I still think this book holds up. Now, it would be higher on this list if Patrick would just get around to finishing the series, but it's still fantastic. In number 7, we have the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, book 3 of the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. This whole series was fantastic, and I think book 3 was my favorite by like the slimmest of margins. The whole series is great. In this lit RPG book series, alien corporations have taken over the world. They're harvesting our natural resource, and they've basically funneled pretty much all the survivors into this televised game that results in millions of people dying. And Matt Denneman just crushes the world building in this game. He simultaneously makes this dystopian, horrific, crazy lit RPG experience also feel meaningful and tragic at the same time, while simultaneously sprinkling in a little dark humor in there. It's so well done, and it shouldn't work, but it does. In number 6, we have The Will of the Many by James Islington. It's funny that this one came up because I'm currently trying to get through the Lycanius trilogy, and I'm gonna DNF it because the second book is just, there's so many things I don't like about the second book. I'm not the biggest fan. That being said, it is just awesome to see an author step up their game from one book to the next and just create a fantastic book in The Will of the Many. This is the first of his next book series, and I'm super excited for this next book to come out. The pacing, the plot, the characters, this book is really good. In number 5, we have Morning Star, the third book of the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. This series is fantastic. It is just a phenomenal dystopia space opera that follows a guy in the lower class who fakes his way into the higher class and then just like starts a cultural revolution and a literal revolution. It's really good. But what kept me on my toes and why I picked this book out of all the books in the series is the romance arc between the protagonist and Mustang. I was on the edge of my seat just seeing how this would play out. I really didn't know what was happening. You know, for a while there, I thought they were going to kill each other. Pierce Brown he knocked this one out of the park. In number 3, we have The Hero of Ages, book 3 of the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This book series was phenomenal from start to finish. I love how the whole series managed to tie itself together, even though each book felt distinctly unique. I love the romance, the character arcs, the plot, the progression, the incredible like grimdark feeling of it all. This book was so good, it got me back into writing. I never would have finished my book if I hadn't been inspired by Mistborn. In number 3, we have Bloodline, book 9 of the Cradle book series by Will White. This progression book series was phenomenal from start to finish. Some of my favorite characters in any book series. The pacing was phenomenal. The progression was just so exciting. It just kept you on your toes. And I picked book 9 out of the series because in this book, our protagonist, Wei Shi Linden, has to return home. So the premise of this book is that there's an incredible danger coming to the Sacred Valley where our protagonist was born and raised and left after the end of book 1. Now the protagonist is returning to Sacred Valley to warn everyone of the danger and have them evacuate, basically, because it's the kind of danger that even after 9 books of progression, he's not ready to fight. And he is just met with mistrust, suspicion, people turn on him, backstab him, and it's just crazy. It helps you and the protagonist realize that maybe his hometown wasn't that great to begin with, and it helps you appreciate the incredible relationships that he's developed along the way. I love this entire series, and book 9 was just phenomenal. In number 2, we have Oathbringer, the 3rd book of the Stormlight Archives, once again by our boy Brandon Sanderson. I love this book. I love Dalinar Kholin. He's probably one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, like right there below Aethan Aurelius. It's funny because a lot of people I listen to on the internet consider this to be probably their least favorite or close to their least favorite book in the series. And it was definitely my favorite. And maybe it's just I have a military background and I just love Dalinar Kholin and all of his gritty backstories. But this book just really spoke to me. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I cannot wait for Brandon to finish this series. And finally, in number 1, we have Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. This book was a fantastic conclusion to a 14-book series in the Wheel of Time. I admit I was not the biggest fan of the series by book 1, 2, even book 3, but by book 4, I had fallen in love with the series and the characters, and I just loved it. I have to pick Memory of Light because it just tied the whole series together so well. And when you think of how many character arcs there were, how many named characters there were who fought in this last book and survived up until the final book, and the way Brandon Sanderson managed to conclude it was just phenomenal. He did such a good job with this book. I think it has to be the number 1 on my list. All right, boyos, this concludes my top 10 books of all time. I write in epic fantasy with multiple POVs, so I'm always looking for more epic fantasy books. And here's some fantasy books that are on my to-be-read list right now. I plan to consume a lot of books in the next year, and I fully expect this list to change a lot in 2025. If y'all disagree with me or you have any great book recommendations, let me know in the comments. Later, Kings.